Good evening. On behalf of Best Life Brands family of companies, ComForCare, At Your Side Home Care, and Care Patrol, we'd like to welcome all attendees from around the country and Canada to the live presentation, Caregiver Stress in the Time of COVID. My name is Stephanie Wierzbicka, and I'm Manager of Strategic Healthcare Programs at ComForCare Home Care and the corporate franchise headquarters, and I will be with you tonight. So the purpose of this webinar is to serve as an opportunity to have a conversation about COVID. Now, we're probably not going to share much with you in regards to COVID because there's so much information out there, and most of us have even had a chance to speak with family and friends. But what we wanted to do is really take a deeper dive on how it impacts us in terms of stress, grief, and caring from a distance. All these topics present unique challenges that we want to explore and talk about some helpful solutions. So in this three-part conversational webinar series, we'll begin with caregiver stress in the time of COVID. And what we're going to review is what is stress. Now, we've all experienced it and we pretty much know what it is, but it's really helpful when you're going through an educational opportunity like this is to kind of really explore what it really means, which can also help you identify what it is and what it means to you and the impact that it really has. We also want to talk about how stress is a little bit different during COVID. Some of us are just exhausted from it, and as a result of that, experience the stress and sometimes the burnout that comes with it too. Not only that, as a family caregiver or an informal caregiver or professional caregiver, if you're working in healthcare or just quite simply supporting your family and loved ones, it can be exhausting. And there's a lot of stress associated with it and thinking, well, is my loved one who's in that vulnerable population, are they safe? What about if they were exposed? So there's all these different levels of stress that kind of enter our reality in our own personal homes that we've never experienced before. And as a result of that, it leaves us all kind of wondering, well, now what do I do? So we're going to get a chance to explore that. And I think one of the most impactful and most important things of this particular webinar is that we're going to be talking about some tips that every single caregiver can use. So before I introduce to you our speaker, I'd like to run through just a few housekeeping items. First of all, this is a 30-minute presentation, but we've left plenty of time at the end for question and answers. Also, all attendees are in listen-only mode. So what that means is if this is your first time attending a webinar or not, we want to encourage you to use that chat feature. This is a great opportunity for you to just even tell us where you're from or even just throw some questions in there to the audience. You're joined by over 200 people that have decided to take time out of their evening to be here with us and are probably going through some similar situations as you. Take this opportunity to throw out questions or concerns and even offer some advice and some helpful tips that others can learn from. I think that's one of the greatest things about technology and sort of everything we've been forced to do is that here we are in the comfort of our own homes, surrounded by 200 other people that are going through similar things just like you. So take advantage of it. Also know that at the end of this webinar, when Cynthia and I are done, Dr. Green are done with presenting the information on this webinar, we will go ahead and take that opportunity to answer additional questions that are coming in and take that opportunity to kind of explore together what that means for you. So before I go ahead and introduce our speaker, what I'd like to do is go ahead and introduce to you the company that is hosting this educational event. So Best Life Brands includes a suite of companies all focused on supporting exceptional senior care solutions. The first being ComForCare and At Your Side Home Care. We have the unique opportunity to assist families and seniors experience in-home care that helps them find meaning and purpose while keeping them safe at home. One of our greatest passions is to guide families and clients through their care journey that introduces caregivers into their lives that care like family. We provide specialized services including fall risk management and dementia care services. The second company is Care Patrol. And their main focus is to assist families and individuals find the right senior care living community options. As we all know, there's a lot of options out there. Independent living, assisted living, and so on. And that's where Care Patrol comes in. And I like to think of their service kind of like a realtor. They help families identify senior living options in their community and facilitate the entire process from taking tours to moving in. So because of this, they build trust with their clients that is so important with true life transitions. And now for our speakers. So first I mentioned, my name is Stephanie Wierzbicka, and I am manager of strategic healthcare programs. And I truly get the unique opportunity to develop programs to help our clients live their best life possible. Over the past 16 years here at ComForCare, I've learned that teaching and educating our communities, like we are here tonight, can make a big impact on improving health that I get an opportunity to be a part of on a national level, and I'm truly grateful for it. And our main speaker, who we are very excited to have here tonight, is Dr. Cynthia Green. And you might actually hear me just call her Cynthia, because I'm so used to just working with her, but Dr. Green is a clinical psychologist and cognitive wellness expert. Dr. Green is the CEO of TBH Brands, parent company of Total Brain Health, a leader provider of brain fitness training products and services. A member of the Department of Psychiatry faculty at the Mount Sinai School of Medicine since 1990, Dr. Green is the author of 6 books on brain health, one in which she just released. Dr. Green serves on the Industry Advisory Board of the International Council of Active Aging and the Optimizing Wellness Committee of the Dementia Action Alliance, and is a frequent media guest. I guess you could say we have the right person for this topic. So Dr. Green, let's just go ahead and kick it off and start talking about really what this particular webinar, this conversational webinar, is really about, and talking about what is stress. I know that you as a clinical psychologist is going to help walk us through some of the deeper meanings behind stress and the true impact that it has, especially on us as caregivers that are particularly vulnerable to it. But if you could help us all understand just what it is, so we all kind of get on the same level playing field.
Yes, thank you. It's my pleasure. And I really am thrilled to see everybody here. The chat keeps popping up with where people are from. And I just always like to say, to start when I'm speaking with caregivers, by saying thank you. You are doing an incredible job. It's a hard job. And however you're doing it well. And as a mental health expert, I'm not here to tell you how to do it better. I have tremendous respect for how you're doing it. I'm really here in the hopes that some of what I'll be able to share from the professional side will be of assistance to you, will help you in thinking about your role and in thinking how to take good care of yourself. So, you know, it's kind of funny because I think in talking about what stress is, every caregiver knows what stress is. As Stephanie just said, caregivers are particularly vulnerable to stress. But first of all, let's just say that stress is real. Stress is a physiological response that we have to a perceived threat. And it's nicknamed the fight or flight response because it was actually quite adaptive when we were living in caves and there were really physical threats to our well-being and our safety. The stress response kept us alert and primed to either stand up for ourselves by fighting or to flee, to find safety away from that threat. However, today our minds don't really readily distinguish between what is a perceived threat, so being stuck in traffic or feeling stressed over not reaching the person you're caring for over the phone if it's at a long distance, or you know, feeling stressed about their behavior if you have someone that you're caring for who has some cognitive loss and during COVID some of their behaviors you felt might have put them at risk and they couldn't understand and you couldn't make them understand what that risk was. Those are just some examples of the kind of stress that we have today, where it might not be the same as being, you know, having to fight off a bear, although with COVID it certainly could sometimes feel that way. But that the threat, even when it isn't that dangerous, our stress response is similar. And that stress response can have very negative consequences over aspects of our health, including our physical well-being, our intellectual or cognitive health, as well as our emotional health.
This is true. And I like to sometimes also compare stress to burnout because I feel like both have some level of fatigue. Do you agree with that, or do you think they're separate?
No, I think that burnout is the result of many chronic burdens, including
Mm-hmm.
stress. So
Yeah.
there's a lot to the role of a caregiver. And one of the things that you are at risk for is burnout, which is, I think, the result of kind of that chronic stress and the chronic aspects of the role. But I hope that some of the tips that we're going to talk about tonight will help with burnout and also protecting
Mm-hmm.
yourself from burnout, which I think is really the role of managing stress in part.
Absolutely. And so that kind of leads us into that next discussion too, right? Is how do you know you're stressed? So I like to think even with myself, right? Like there's just always natural stressors. And I've also heard that a good way to compare what is a good healthy amount of stress to not is kind of like thinking of like a rubber band. You know, if you have a
Mm-hmm.
rubber band, it's kind of limp. It's not necessarily in your life a great thing, but if it's stretched, it also means that it's about to break, which is sort of symbolic to the experience of stress and what it can kind of do. And it can be good and can also be a hindrance at the same time. So when you think about stress and knowing if you are, because we all have some level of it, I guess our questions is how do you know you're stressed? And to what extent in these categories you're going to share with us is a healthy experience versus not so healthy? What do we need to be looking for?
Those are great questions. And I think that we all have a sense that we know our own selves and what it feels like when we are stressed. But sometimes we get very comfortable with that feeling of stress. And I think that particularly when we're caregiving, and so we have this ongoing role that can be stressful, you might
Mm-hmm.
find, I know I do sometimes, I find myself in the morning making my coffee, thinking about everything I have to get done, and I am holding my breath, right? And I'm like, oh, I'm holding my breath. And that is actually a sign of stress, that interruption of the breathing process. So even an expert like myself can not always be aware when I'm caught up in my day-to-day that I am feeling more stress. So it's important to
Mm-hmm.
know what that feels like for ourselves and to realize that it's something we need to counter, right? That's not normal. So that stretch of the rubber band is a great example. We don't always want to be stretched. One of the things that can contribute to stress is that sense of control. So that's a very important concept when it comes to stress management. Often it's the things that feel out of our control that make us feel stressed. So we do need to have a
Mm-hmm.
little bit of stress to feel primed. Stephanie, you and I probably wouldn't have gotten on the call on time. We might not have, bathed. We could still be in our pajamas if we weren't feeling somewhat like we have to prime and be prepared. And people, we are organized, we get things done because we are responsive to that pressure. When it becomes stressful is when it feels out of our control. And that's why caregiving is a particularly vulnerable role to stress, because so much of the role is not in our control, right? We're responding to someone else's needs. And to the changes that come from both externally regarding that individual and from kind of that individual's path in terms of whatever their needs are that change because, they're in that role of needing our assistance. So one of the things that you can start to do is, at least when you are going through your day-to-day, think about whether you're stressed and know what some of those signs are. And again, stress is a physiological response. So a lot of those responses
Mm-hmm.
are physiological, such as having your heart race, feeling your palms get sweaty, feeling that rush of adrenaline, like you just feel kind of anxious, but it feels like chemical, right? I mentioned breathing. That's something I know about myself. So my breathing changes. I hold my breath. A lot of people experience rapid or shallow breathing. I do eventually start breathing again.
But you're a breath holder. You're like,
I did something that I know about myself.
of
But you might
course,
have difficulty
right.
sleeping or overeat. And a lot of people, when they're stressed, they'll use substances more. It might be food, it might be alcohol, or something else. Cognitively, we might feel more distracted. It might be harder to focus. We might be more forgetful. It can be comforting to people, especially caregivers, when you have a loved one that you're caring for who has cognitive loss. If you start to feel forgetful, you can be even more worried, right? But just a reminder that stress really can cause that distractibility because we're not focused. So we're not learning things like a name. It's not memory loss primarily. It's that we're not able to focus and learn the information. And that can be a sign of stress, as can mood changes like anxious or depressed mood, feeling preoccupied, especially during COVID. Stephanie, I think that's a great example where we could have been or still might be having kind of these preoccupying thoughts of feeling anxious about somebody, worrying about them, worrying about their behavior, something that they might do, or how we're going to get something done, and that sense of loss of control. And then finally, really importantly for caregivers, a sense of being isolated. And so I'm really glad that so many people are on this call tonight because you can feel connected to each other. And as Stephanie said so nicely at the top of the call, this is a time to see other people, to chat with other people, and to feel supported that there's other people who have these concerns as well, because isolation is something that can definitely result from caregiving, and especially right now.
It can, and it can feel hard to feel like you have that time to get out and connect. And like you said, even with COVID and trying to protect ourselves and others, it just kind of leads to that. And I like to say that sometimes the stress is just a natural reaction to being the caregiver syndrome. You know, sometimes being in that position of caring for sometimes others more than yourself leads to this stress. And so, you know, and then same with COVID. So the stress during COVID is different for everybody, right? Majority of us, I'm imagining, based on our population of who we care for, and that a majority of our attendees here are caring for a loved one, are caring for individuals that kind of fit that vulnerable population that is most impacted by COVID. We're trying to protect ourselves, trying to limit exposure. I don't know if anyone still feels normal going to the grocery store right now, even still, right? Everything has changed. And so even providing care to a loved one presents some kind of stress, but then COVID gives a different layer, especially if there was a potential exposure, or just even going to the doctor's office and feeling safe in doing so. So, you know, with that type of, with this type of just situation that we have, and the experience that we're all going through now, any kind of tips relative to those family caregivers right now that are experiencing COVID and caring for somebody?
Well, I think that, you know, I started out by presenting and talking about how we don't have the kind of primary threat that we did at the time that the fight or flight response came about from an evolutionary perspective. But in fact, we do. And for the first time, for many of us in our lifetimes, there is this sense of this kind of layer of this threat of disease. We understand more about it now. And so that can be reassuring. We have more protocols in place, but I think that especially initially, everyone was stressed. And it wasn't only the threat of that, but the day-to-day uncertainty that came with it, the financial uncertainty that continues for many families, and the uncertainty of the outcome, you know, when this is going to end, when we'll be able to get back to a routine that feels more normal. I went into the grocery store the other day and I had this kind of existential moment of looking around and going, wow, everyone is in a mask. Like, you know, now this is our new normal, but it happened very quickly. So everyone is stressed. And then, yes, as you said, you know, the caregiving on top of it, the unique daily challenges, especially in caring for someone who has cognitive loss. So, you know, you're already trying to keep them safe when they might not have the ability to make the kinds of judgments they need to stay safe. And so to add COVID on top of that can be very a unique challenge. It can be emotionally draining. And again, you have the uncertainty of the outcome. So it adds, if you will, just that additional layer on top of everyone else's stress during this time period.
It does. And with that being said, we do have some very, very useful strategies that are really practical, because everything we just kind of shared, I can tell that there's a lot of nodding heads and saying, yep, experiencing that. Well, now what? What can I do about it?
Right.
So Dr. Green has put together some wonderful tips. Do you want to walk us through what some of your suggestions are?
Yes, I'd love to. And so, as I said at the top, I hope that these are helpful suggestions. Again, this isn't to burden you with something else you feel you need to do. Maybe what helps you feel less stressed is just being on this webinar. But these are some things that I want to share that I've taught a lot around busting stress. They're easy, and they are things that range in terms of how, you know, kind of simple they are, and something that might take a little more effort, but I hope you can find some comfort zone in here and at least one of these that might work for you. And I want to remind you that these will be included in the booklet that you'll be getting. So don't feel that you have to take notes or remember all of them right now. We're going to go through them one by one, but you'll have the booklet afterwards. And so you'll have the resource for these as well. That's right. So there's 6, we're going to go through them one at a time. Okay. So the first one is slow breaths. And I have to tell you, this is my go-to emergency stress buster. When I have that experience, as I just explained to you, of feeling like I'm holding my breath, one of the things I do is I practice slow breaths. And all this asks you to do is take a few slow breaths. One of the things that we know is breathing is disrupted when we're feeling stressed. And so one of the ways we can balance that and kind of counter that stress response is by controlling our breathing and breathing more deeply and at a slower rhythm. And we're probably a little tight for time, but I'm going to take a moment here and ask everyone just to close your eyes and go ahead and take a moment to take a couple of deep breaths. And just go ahead and breathe into your belly. And then breathe out through your nose, really emptying your breath. And take another breath, just following the wave of your breath. And as you follow that wave, just try to slow it slightly, feeling more relaxed. Okay, and now you can open your eyes if you would close them. And I hope that that just gave you a little bit of a taste of what this can do just in the moment to help you feel more relaxed. So this is a great, what I call an emergency stress buster, because you can do it if you just feel yourself getting stressed, just you can take that breath, or you could practice it as a regular routine for a few minutes every day, say before bed. It's just an easy, very accessible thing for all of us to do. So the next stress buster builds on this. It's one of my favorites. It's called breathing into your heart. And what this does is it takes the breathing, but it gives you imagery. So many of us like visual imagery. It can be something that we are drawn to. It can kind of fill our thinking. Sometimes people, when they just breathe, they still don't escape their thoughts. And so one of the things breathing into your heart does is it gives you a focal point visually as well. And in this technique, what you do is you breathe into your heart. So you kind of imagine that your heart is a balloon. So it gives you a focal point for kind of filling your chest, if you will, with that breath. Again, breathing slowly and deeply. And at the same time, you picture in your mind's eye something that makes you feel wonderful. So it can be a special place. Sometimes people really like the image of being on the beach and having the sound of the ocean. It could be a favorite hike or a favorite spot that you have. It can be a person, someone you love, something that gives you tremendous joy and a sense of peace. So just if you, even as I talk about it, had an image in your mind. So for example, I often go to a favorite hike that is near my parents' home in Idaho that gives me a wonderful sense of peace. And so, you know, something like that that is special for you, then this is a great technique to try as well, especially if you like the idea of having something visual to focus on as well. Now, this is a technique that might take a little more time. So it's something you might do more on a regular basis, called Take 5. And one thing that we know about caregiving is that you often don't, as they say, put on your own oxygen mask first, right? It's very hard to take that time for ourselves. Sometimes it can be physically impossible to step away, especially during COVID. Sometimes we just can't even create that distance for ourselves emotionally. But I'm here to tell you that it is true that you're going to be better at your role as a caregiver and take better care of yourself, and that your health is important. It really matters if you take time for yourself, even if it's just a few minutes every day. So find something that you can do to step away, even if it's something where you're not physically away, but someplace where you can create kind of psychic or emotional space for yourself. You can have a cup of herbal tea, you can listen to music and dance, you know, for a few minutes. You can go for a short walk. Sometimes these are things you can even do with a person you're caring for. So I used to talk with folks a lot who were taking care of children about sitting down and coloring, not just using something as a way to distract the other person, the person you're caring for, but to do it with them that is also relaxing for you. So look for ways to take that break for yourself every day. If you can get away, that's great. But even if you can't get away, you still deserve that time.
And I like to share sometimes too in home care, because we support a lot of families that are caring for their loved one before we oftentimes come in as an agency. And some of the suggestions with the Take 5 that we've also made is, if you can, maybe wake up 5 or 10 minutes before your loved one, even though it just may feel like you don't have 5 or 10 more minutes to spare. But if you can even do that in the morning before anyone else is up in your home, just to take that time, just so you can kind of visualize your day, take advantage of one of these Take 5 tips, it can really go a long way.
Yes, and a lot of times I think we end up wanting to do a chore at that time, right? But
right.
You know, if you can resist the temptation and make it about yourself, the chore will get done.
Yes.
Our fourth tip is to be sure to care for yourself, right? And just going back to this again, you take better care of others when you take care of yourself. So make time for yourself. And this goes back to the idea of maybe, you know, finding ways to have someone support you in getting a break, to find things that balance your day with things that you find relaxing and enriching, and comforting. So listening to music, or, you know, doing knitting or needlepoint, or something that you find helps you feel like you're cared for as well. And that includes friends, right? That includes having friends to talk with, to talk things through, especially now when we can't physically be with people. I think many of us have been more isolated from our support systems. But, you know, just a reminder that you need that support, even if you're not seeing people. Sometimes just to problem solve. I was talking to a friend of mine yesterday who her mother moved in with her during this time period, and she wants to go away, but she feels both stressed about how to figure that out and guilty about leaving, and not sure how to do that safely, right? So even just, you know, having someone to bounce ideas off of, right, can be a really helpful thing. Number 5, accept help. And again, this is something, especially during COVID, that I think can be difficult, because we have, on top of our concerns as caregivers around accepting help and making sure that someone would kind of step up to the role in the same way that we do, that we also have concerns about protocols and safety. But it's very important to make room for others to help. And that often when we do really allow other people to help, it might not be the same way that we do something, but it's probably just as good. And in sometimes better, sometimes it can be good to have a different perspective as well in gaining help. So look for tangible ways that you can get help. Maybe you can hire someone to come in and help you, and to help you with daily care, help you with things that would give you some time as well. And also for emotional help. So a friend, as we just talked about, but it can also be good to have someone who is maybe a little less personally involved, such as a counselor or a spiritual advisor who can be someone that you can lean on for advice, or just to listen to you as you talk about the stress and your concerns in caregiving.
Absolutely.
And then finally, one of my favorites, which is called Put on the Brakes. And this uses a first letter acronym to help you remember the steps. So it's a little bit of uses a little memory strategy in there. This is a great strategy that I have taught a lot, and it's very popular because many times we feel stressed, and in the moment, we don't feel we have control over our reaction. We don't always like the way we react, and we're not always at our best when we're stressed. And especially right now, when there might be something where we feel behaviors are risky, if we take our loved one to the grocery store and they're not wearing their mask, or we feel like they're touching things, and it feels unsafe, whatever that might be. The breaks is a great technique. It's these steps to help you remember to do some things to help you feel more in control in a stressful situation. So B stands for breathe, which we've talked about. R is for relax. So to kind of notice any body tension and just try to relax yourself. A, away or stay, is to decide if it's best to stay or to step away. You can't always step away as a caregiver. I recognize that. But just kind of keep that maybe cognitively in your mind, right? Or maybe emotionally, you can step back a little bit from the situation. Then to really think about what the problem is. And I think for myself, this is a really good reset sometimes when I'm having a stress reaction to something. How serious is this? There's another tip that people use is thinking about it from the perspective of in 10 minutes, in 10 days, in 10 years, how much something will matter. And that can be helpful here too. So really, how serious is this problem? Am I reacting to something that really matters? And is the level of my reaction in response really appropriate to what is happening here? And then you can think about what your solutions are. What are your options to this problem? And then how you can stay cool. And most importantly, it's hard sometimes to stay cool. But if we start to breathe and relax and to feel that we have a little control by problem solving, that can help us to stay cool when we're feeling stressed in a particular moment. So what I'd like to leave everyone with is to think this week over these tips. And if there's 2 of them here that you think you could try, and I know, again, that you don't need something else to do as a caregiver, but if there's something that you want to try after listening to this, even if it's just breathing, even if it's just saying to yourself, okay, before I go to bed every night for 1 minute, I'm going to set the timer and I'm just going to try breathing to feel more relaxed and being more in touch with my sense of how stressed I feel. That would be great. And I hope that you'll find these tips helpful. I love this quote by the Buddhist teacher, Pema Chodron: "You are the sky, everything else is just the weather." And I think that it has a sense of, to me, the expansiveness of who we are as people. As caregivers, you are very precious, and you're playing a very important role in taking care of others and from a place of love. And so these feelings of stress, that's the weather, that will come and go. But I hope that this helps make those storms a little bit easier when they do come.
And I think so. I mean, just even having the reminder just to breathe in a very mindful way can at least help provide a little bit of relief, right? In sort of what we're experiencing as a caregiver. I guess to go off of one of your tips with accepting help, we always like to say that caregiving, even if you're the loved one providing care, is a team sport. And you shouldn't do it alone. And to find your teammates who can help you. There are sometimes free community resources And then there are in-home care services like ComForCare. And the really great thing about ComForCare and at your side locations that are nationwide is that we can help you coordinate those resources. But even if it's just 4 hours a week, you know, what that can do for you as a caregiver is to allow yourself to get out in the community and have that social interaction that is so important. So even from a distance and from a safe perspective, meeting up with a friend at a park 6 feet apart with your masks outside, especially before it gets cold for many of us throughout the country, take advantage of it. See what you can do and what your options are. Our agencies are very creative in finding flexible solutions that pretty much meet all families' needs and circumstances. The other thing too about home care is that sometimes it's a little bit concerning about, is it safe to allow someone else in my home or with my loved one? And the answer is yes. These professionals are trained, they follow CDC guidelines, and they're there to help and assist and follow the right protocol to ensure everyone's safety. So it's a really incredible service to consider. If you haven't done it before, I would definitely suggest you at least make a phone call. That can't hurt, just to kind of get an idea of what exactly an in-home care provider can do. And it's not only for your loved one. I always like to say that care is for the whole family. And that's really our approach, and that's one of our key values as a home care provider, is that we care like family. And what that means is that we support the entire family unit, and whether you're caring from a distance or you're right there with your loved one, we're going to support every single unique need and circumstance that you have to ensure that you're feeling some of that relief that we know that so often home care can make a really great impact on. The other aspect to care too is sometimes looking at community living. We always like to say that people most of the time enjoy living at home and being at home for as long as possible, but sometimes that's not always the right option. And so as a healthcare provider like ComForCare or Care Patrol, our job is to always help guide our families through their journey to make sure that they find the right solutions, services, or setting that meets their needs. And that's where these senior communities come in, whether it's independent, assisted living, or memory care units. We can help you identify where those are in your community, why you may want one or over another, and even what rent could look like, and what would be involved for your loved one and how it can support them. So these are two really great resources. And again, even just by calling a home care provider or even Care Patrol, we can help you identify all kinds of resources in your community that aren't just based on the service that we specifically provide. And that's something that we always really are motivated by, and is our true objective as a provider, is to really help you identify what is available in your community, and to really help you coordinate and identify what's going to be best for you and your loved one. So I do want to thank all of you for joining. I want to remind everyone who's on this call with us is that we have 2 additional webinars coming up. These are more conversational. So today's was really talking about stress relative to COVID and being a caregiver. But we have 2 other topics, all specific to COVID, relative to grief, whether you've lost a loved one because of COVID, or maybe someone passed during COVID and you couldn't have a funeral, or you couldn't be with your loved one during the hospital, or maybe they're in the hospital right now. Those are very stressful situations that has a different kind of impact as a caregiver than the typical day-to-day COVID stress that we experience daily. We also have caring from a distance coming up. So we do have some time for some questions. I have seen that some have come up. Some things I want to mention, I just kind of threw in there. What are you guys going to do relative to the breaks philosophy, relative to some caregiving tips? And I just see that some people are just sharing that they're going to breathe. It is important, and it's biological. It can actually help calm your nervous system.
Yes, and it's also, because I forgot to mention this, it's something you can do with your loved one.
Yes.
And there's, studies showing that some meditative practices help people who are living with dementia as well. And it's something that we teach in our programs for those living with dementia. And breathing is something that can be modeled and mirrored. So even if the verbal cueing isn't something that they can access, working with you and following your movements of the breath, holding hands while you're breathing, right? To cue them. It can be something that's very helpful for everybody.
Yeah, and I did see something in one of the comments. So this is not a question, but this is a I hear you, I see you. I wish I could put down my cup of coffee or just sit down and enjoy a cup of coffee, let's say, because that person, like so many others, probably feels like they just don't know what direction they're going in because they're going in so many. And to those caregivers, what I like to say to you is, first of all, I applaud you and know that you are valued and that your loved one, whether they can communicate it or not, appreciate what you're doing. But at some point, we need to find that balance. Whether it's like Dr. Green shared with us, the chore will get done at some point. Is there something that can just go? I had some advice given to me when I had twins, and when they were newborns, I didn't know what day or time it was. And I was told, don't worry about everything else around you, just let it go. You have to lower your expectations sometimes by just your home environment. And if you're like me, it's like everything needs to be organized, and that's another source of stress. But once I heard that and I accepted it and I let some things go, it helped. And the other thing I always like to personally suggest, so Dr. Green, I'm going to ask you for what you suggest to those that just don't even have time to put down their coffee and just sit, is to take that time in the morning or find your time. There has to be some moment of time throughout the day that you're going to have to find. It probably doesn't exist right now, but you got to make it. And that time is so valuable because your loved one needs you to be at your best. If you are their main caregiver, they do need you, and that's a lot to take on. But at the same time, you need to find that balance, find that time just for you, because that can be a renewing sense of place that can be really difficult to find in the beginning. But once you give yourself that permission, even if it's 5 minutes and you get someone off onto another task, you can give yourself that 5 minutes. It can be so worth it. Dr. Green, what do you say to those caregivers out there that don't even have time to sit down and enjoy their cup of coffee?
So that's one of the reasons I started out by saying that the last thing I want this to feel like to any caregiver is that I'm giving you more to do. You have plenty to do. And I think that that can happen when you're looking for advice, when you're feeling so overwhelmed that you feel like you can't even have a cup of coffee. That you come to a presentation like this and you think, oh my God, this is just more stuff that I need to do. So the reason I present kind of a whole range of tips for the stress management side is so that I hope everyone can find a little crack in their door or in the window to kind of doing at least one of these. And so even if you can just breathe, right? Even if you can just set aside that minute, maybe, you know, while you're lying in bed before you get up, to take some deep breaths and check in with yourself. You can set a timer on your watch. You could take a minute every hour or a couple of minutes at a time of day where it might be more downtime. Maybe you're watching TV with your loved one, and so you can, you know, still be there, but take that little break of a breath for yourself. It is such a hard job, and it is sometimes truly overwhelming to find that time, and it can feel more burdensome to try to find the time. But at least something simple like finding, you know, the deep breathing or breathing into your heart, that can give you that little break. And sometimes that little break, once we allow ourselves, can start us on the road and that process of taking better care of ourselves.
Agreed. Great advice. One other question that came up that's very relevant is one of our caregivers here is, you know, feeling the impact of isolation and just not being able to hug. I know that there's been studies around just hugging and how important that can be. And so are there any suggestions on substitutions for that true
physical contact?
Physical contact.
You know, it's so painful, isn't it? It's just unbelievably painful and hard. And I read something because I was doing some programming, and in an acupressure piece that I was reading about, looking at different acupressure points and things like that for stress. One of it was to give yourself a hug. So one of the moves was just to also hug yourself, which isn't the same, but it does give us that physiological sensation of being hugged. Someone's putting in the chat, it's a great idea, having a pillow with pictures of loved ones That's a lovely idea. And that's something that you can do online to order. There's a lot of companies that inexpensively will make pillows, and, quiet moments too. So I know, especially with family members, and I know this is something we're going to talk about in another webinar, but personally, when I've been with family members who've lost a parent, or many of my dear friends have lost parents in this time, being quiet together, not feeling that you have to fill that moment with anything more than love. And, it cannot take the place of that physical connection, but it can kind of create a moment where there's a connection where we're not looking to fill it with anything else.
That's right. Yeah, and it is important. And someone else from the chat, this is so great to see so many comments, is sometimes even there's just, small moments of joy by just sitting down and having even that cup of coffee with your loved one, right? And just sitting down in that moment and just enjoying what you're able to do, while we get through this time. Well, Dr. Green, that pretty much concludes our webinar. I want to thank you again for joining us, and thank to everybody out there that has taken time out of their evening to be with us. We do look forward to bringing additional webinars coming up here in the next 2 weeks. And as Dr. Green shared, we will be sharing a booklet that talks a lot about these strategies that you'll be able to go through and just say, oh yeah, what was on the breaks? That B, oh yeah, breathing. And just kind of give you some of those helpful tips that we hope gives you some peace of mind during these unusual times. We're all in this together. Dr. Green, thank you again, and thanks to everyone for joining. Hope to see you next week.